At 3:12 a.m. Brussels time, the lights were still on inside the Berlaymont building. Most of Europe was asleep. Markets were closed, streets were quiet. But in a secured conference room overlooking a dark and silent city, Ursula von der Leyen was staring at a single line of text that had just arrived from California. It wasn't long, it wasn't diplomatic, it wasn't open to interpretation. Compliance rejected. 40 minutes later, Elon Musk posted a message that detonated across the digital world. Europe has 72 hours. No explanation, no elaboration, just a countdown. Within minutes, millions of European users began noticing something strange. Features loading slower than usual, certain posts failing to publish, advertiser dashboards flickering. Then the banner appeared across X accounts registered within the European Union. Operational sunset in 71 hours, 42 minutes. The wording was surgical, not suspension, not outage, sunset. Across 27 nations, 340 million people refreshed their screens in disbelief. This wasn't a hack, it wasn't ransomware, it wasn't a technical collapse. It was a decision. For nearly 2 years, tension between Elon Musk and Ursula von der Leyen had been tightening like a wire pulled too far. The European Union had refined its digital services framework, expanding oversight, strengthening enforcement mechanisms, demanding deeper transparency into algorithmic systems. Brussels believed it was protecting democratic stability. Musk believed it was institutionalizing censorship. The collision had been inevitable. Von der Leyen had faced Silicon Valley before. She had pressured Apple into restructuring its app ecosystem. She had overseen record antitrust penalties against Google. She had forced Meta to rewrite core data policies. Every time, the pattern repeated: resistance, negotiation, fine, compliance. No corporation had ever walked away from 450 million affluent consumers, because no rational executive would. But Elon Musk was not operating under the same architecture of restraint. He did not answer to a board that could remove him. He did not depend on cautious institutional investors demanding predictable returns. He had purchased X with personal capital and personal conviction, and what Brussels had interpreted as defiance was, in his mind, preparation. 70 hours earlier, EU regulators had delivered their final framework. Embed independent EU-approved oversight teams inside X's moderation structure. Provide real-time algorithmic transparency dashboards accessible to Commission officials. Implement automatic compliance triggers aligned with EU-defined harmful content categories. In private, von der Leyen believed this was the final pressure point. The proposal was calibrated to be firm but survivable. Enough control to demonstrate authority, enough flexibility for Musk to claim compromise. Instead, he chose rupture. Inside X headquarters, engineers had been quietly building parallel infrastructure for months: redundant routing, regional isolation protocols, financial decoupling scenarios. It had been treated as contingency planning. Now it was active strategy. When Musk typed "Europe has 72 hours," he wasn't improvising, he was initiating. Brussels convened an emergency session before sunrise. Legal advisors argued about injunctions. Telecommunications ministers demanded impact assessments. Intelligence agencies were pulled into briefings. Because this was no longer a regulatory dispute, it was infrastructure warfare, without a single missile fired. As the timer dropped below 60 hours, advertisers began withdrawing campaigns preemptively. European political figures scrambled to export data archives. Influencers downloaded years of content in compressed files, unsure whether servers would remain reachable long enough to complete transfers. And then the second announcement came. Starlink services within EU jurisdiction under review, pending regulatory alignment. It was one sentence. It changed everything. In rural Spain, agricultural monitoring systems relied on Starlink satellites. In northern Finland, remote research stations depended on its connectivity. Across Eastern Europe, small businesses used it as backup internet during grid instability. The idea that satellite coverage could become leverage sent quiet shockwaves through national governments. Von der Leyen understood the stakes immediately. Losing a social media platform was disruptive. Losing critical connectivity was destabilizing. Publicly, she maintained composure. At a press conference that afternoon, she emphasized that no private entity could override European law. She framed the moment as a test of democratic resilience. She did not mention Musk by name. Privately, the tone was different. What if he follows through? Because by the 48-hour mark, internal metrics confirmed something alarming. X's global engagement outside Europe was surging. Users in North America, Asia, and Latin America were flooding the platform to witness events in real time. Controversy was driving growth. Financial analysts appeared on television calling Musk irrational. Billions in annual revenue were at stake. European ad markets were among the most lucrative in the world. Walking away defied every business textbook ever written. But Musk had never treated textbooks as instruction manuals. As the countdown reached 36 hours, partial regional throttling began. European IP ranges experienced intermittent service degradation, not a full shutdown, just enough instability to signal seriousness, enough to make reversal more technically complex by the hour. Inside the Berlaymont, the conversation shifted from enforcement to containment. Could member states coordinate emergency alternatives? Could national providers fill potential Starlink gaps? Could legal measures freeze assets within EU territory? Lawyers quietly admitted an uncomfortable truth. You can fine a company, you can ban a company, but you cannot force a company to operate. At 24 hours remaining, protests erupted in Berlin, Milan, and Warsaw. Some demonstrators accused Brussels of regulatory arrogance. Others condemned Musk as an unelected oligarch undermining democratic sovereignty. The narrative fractured exactly along ideological lines. And through it all, the timer kept ticking. Engineers inside X monitored deletion simulations in controlled clusters. Data partitions tagged under EU residency codes were isolated. Financial systems recalculated revenue projections without European streams. Internal memos described the operation with sterile precision. Protocol, horizon. Not severance, not negotiation. Horizon, as if Europe were already behind it. By the final 12 hours, markets were volatile. European tech stocks dipped on uncertainty. U.S. tech indices fluctuated as investors debated whether Musk's gamble would backfire or redefine leverage. Political leaders across the Atlantic watched carefully, calculating what precedent was being set. Because if one billionaire could detach an entire continent from a digital ecosystem voluntarily, the balance of sovereignty had shifted in ways no regulation anticipated. At 6 hours remaining, Musk posted again. Sovereignty cuts both ways. No further explanation. The timer dropped below 5. Inside Brussels, contingency drafts were prepared for both outcomes: victory statements, emergency stabilization plans, diplomatic outreach. No one in that room could say with confidence which script would be needed. At 60 minutes remaining, European users saw a final notification. Archival export window closing. The sky over Brussels was gray with early morning light. Ursula von der Leyen stood at the window of her office watching the city wake up to uncertainty. Somewhere in Texas, Elon Musk was watching a different dashboard entirely. 2 visions of authority, 2 definitions of control, and less than 1 hour before one of them proved irreversible. When the timer hit 0, there was no explosion.
No dramatic blackout, just silence. Across Europe, millions of users refreshed their screens and found emptiness. Profiles returned errors, threads dissolved into blank space. Search bars produced nothing but white voids where conversations once lived. Years of arguments, movements, businesses, communities, gone with mechanical indifference. Inside X headquarters, confirmation logs rolled in. Regional isolation complete. Data clusters decommissioned. Revenue streams recalibrated. The system had absorbed the shock. Europe had not. Within minutes, emergency broadcasts interrupted morning programming across several member states. Telecommunications agencies demanded clarification. Was this reversible? Was it temporary? Had any European citizen data been transferred outside jurisdiction before deletion? Brussels requested immediate legal injunctions through accelerated channels, but the lawyers knew the boundary they were hitting. You cannot compel a private company to provide service if it chooses withdrawal. You can retaliate, you can penalize, but you cannot command participation. Ursula von der Leyen convened a crisis assembly before noon. Her tone was steady, but the stakes were unmistakable. This was no longer about moderation policies or compliance clauses. It was about precedent. If one platform could exit in defiance of regulatory authority, others might calculate similar leverage. And then the second shock landed. Starlink coverage maps flickered. It did not go dark instantly. Instead, service stability began fluctuating across several EU regions. Speeds throttled, latency spiked. Rural hospitals in Ireland reported intermittent disruptions. Agricultural monitoring systems in Poland experienced data delays. Schools in remote Greek islands switched to backup plans. Musk had not fully disconnected the satellites, but he had demonstrated that he could. The psychological impact was deeper than the technical one. For decades, governments assumed that critical infrastructure could be regulated through territorial authority. Now they faced a reality in which infrastructure orbited above them, owned by private capital, responsive to private command. Markets reacted violently. European telecommunication stocks dipped on uncertainty. U.S. tech equities surged briefly on global engagement spikes. Analysts split into camps. Some declared Musk reckless, burning bridges for ideology. Others called it a strategic masterstroke, proving that regulatory dominance has limits. Outside Europe, X's user base grew. The spectacle itself became content. Debates about sovereignty, censorship, corporate autonomy, and democratic oversight flooded timelines in every language. Musk posted only once more. Freedom requires choice. 3 words. They trended worldwide. Back in Brussels, options were narrowing. Retaliatory measures were drafted, coordinated taxation frameworks, antitrust escalations, restrictions on other Musk enterprises operating within EU borders. But each action carried risk of further escalation, because this was no longer asymmetrical. Europe had regulatory power, Musk had infrastructural leverage, and both had demonstrated willingness to use it. As the first full day without X settled over the continent, the absence became tangible. Journalists scrambled to migrate audiences. Small businesses lost digital storefront traffic. Political campaigns recalibrated communication strategies overnight. Activist groups that had organized online for years were forced into unfamiliar terrain. Some citizens blamed Brussels for pushing too hard. Others blamed Musk for weaponizing connectivity. The divide cut through nations, through parties, through communities. Von der Leyen addressed the European Parliament in an emergency session. She did not attack Musk personally. Instead, she framed the moment as a test of European resilience. Democracies, she argued, must never allow private actors to dictate the rules of public discourse. If adaptation was required, Europe would build alternatives. The word autonomy echoed through the chamber. Across the Atlantic, Musk met with advisors reviewing global metrics. Engagement outside Europe had surged beyond projections. Advertisers in Asia and North America were increasing bids, capitalizing on the controversy. Financial losses from the European withdrawal were significant, billions annually, but not existential. He had proven a point. The European Union could not intimidate him into compliance. But even within his circle, a quieter question lingered. What had this demonstration cost long-term? Governments do not forget humiliation easily. In the weeks that followed, Europe accelerated investment into domestic digital infrastructure. Funding packages were proposed for sovereign satellite networks. Legislative frameworks expanded to ensure strategic independence from foreign-controlled platforms. Partnerships among member states deepened. Musk, meanwhile, doubled down publicly on principles of open discourse and corporate independence. He framed the withdrawal not as punishment, but refusal to operate under what he considered excessive control. Both sides claimed moral high ground. Yet the deeper shift was structural. The world had witnessed a new kind of confrontation. Not warships, not sanctions, not tariffs. Infrastructure against legislation. Orbit against territory, ownership against jurisdiction. In Washington, policymakers debated the implications quietly. If American tech leaders could sever access to entire regions, what did that mean for national security? In Asia, regulators reconsidered how tightly they wanted to grip foreign platforms. Investors began pricing geopolitical friction into technology valuations more aggressively than ever before. The lesson was stark. Digital power is not confined by borders, but it is shaped by them. As months passed, European alternatives began emerging. Domestic platforms gained modest traction. Satellite initiatives accelerated from concept to prototype. The immediate shock faded, but the memory did not. Because somewhere in the background, one fact remained undeniable. When confronted with regulatory authority, Musk had chosen exit over submission, and Ursula von der Leyen had chosen enforcement over concession. Neither blinked. The countdown that once ticked on millions of screens had ended, but a different clock had started, one measuring how nations and private empires coexist in an age where code governs communication and satellites beam sovereignty from space. The confrontation did not destroy Europe. It did not destroy X. But it redrew a boundary the world had never clearly seen before. Governments can legislate, corporations can withdraw, and in that tension lies the fragile architecture of the modern digital world. The next clash will not be identical. Different actors, different stakes, different geography. But the precedent has been set. Power in the digital age belongs not only to those who write the laws, but to those who own the infrastructure, and to those willing to walk away from billions to prove a point. And that reality will shape every negotiation that follows.